I got up early one morning and rushed right into the day. I had so much to accomplish, I didn't have time to pray. Anybody ever feel like that? Troubles just tumbled about me, and more heavily came each task. Why doesn't God help me, I wondered. God answered, you didn't ask. I tried to come into God's presence. I used all my keys at the lock. God gently and lovingly chided, why, child, you didn't knock. I wanted to see joy and beauty, but the day toiled on gray and bleak. I called on the Lord for the reason for that. God said, you didn't speak. I woke up early this morning and paused before entering the day. I had so much to accomplish that I had to take time to pray. There's such wisdom and trust in this poem, isn't there? And how very true it can be for us, particularly at this time of year with so much to do. Places to go, meals to cook, parties to attend, catching up in all areas of our life, etc., etc. But today, on the last Sunday of the year, we will bring our theme of the Master's Prayer to a close by digging into and, I trust, elevating our own personal prayer work. I want to offer you my top 10 list for having a rich and robust personal prayer life. And because there are 10, we'll zip through them fairly quickly. That's why in the bulletin, on the pew pocket handout, as you came in, there's a list with some spaces for jotting down notes, if you like. The body. Are you ready for today's top 10 list? Good. Strap in, because here we go. 10. Intentionally take a few moments every day to simply think about God. That's not that hard, is it? Often as we go about our day, we think about, or should I say, we dwell on our problems and all the things that are causing us concern, worry, upset, nervousness, stress. Or perhaps we aren't dwelling on the upset or concern, but we are completely wrapped up in all that has to be done, bouncing from this project to that. Just running on autopilot, really. Is that familiar to anyone? I must say I have to think about one of our closest dear people who goes, whenever that person starts to do one task, they end up doing 5 at the same time so that they can make room for the 6th and the 7th. I spoke to that person yesterday, and I said, what are you doing today? And they said, I am resting. I said, how many people do you have visiting? They said, none. I said, how does it feel? They said, wonderful. Ever get that feeling? Everybody's around you. Everybody's got a case of the gotta-dos. And all the gotta-dos have to be done before. We have to take the time to kind of get away from all that, isn't it? How about if several times a day, perhaps set an alarm on your watch, you stop for a moment, take a breath, and turn your attention to God. Turn with no agenda, no desires, and no tasks. Just stop what you're doing and think about the divine flow of life that lives and moves and has its being in you. Think about the vastness of the universe. Think about the divine intelligence that brought this entire universe into being. Think upon these things just for a few intentional moments every day. This is the golden key that author Emmett Fox wrote about in his book of the same name, The Golden Key, If you haven't read it, we will be getting it in the bookstore. Read it, pore over it, and read it again. Think about God instead of the problem. When you simply think about God, everything begins to change in a miraculously wondrous way. Pray using simple, natural words. I don't know if you've noticed it. I know I have. Some people go to church to show the eloquence with which they can pray. You don't need eloquence. You need a thought in your heart and a love in everything you do. When you pray in a language that you understand, then that has meaning to you. You may hear ministers or practitioners and chaplains pray with beautiful, flowing, flowery words and think, oh, I wish I could pray like that. And then you try and get all hung up on the words being just right and find yourself lacking and perhaps even getting discouraged. I can't do this right, you might even think. And then you don't pray. But here's the deal. There is no right or wrong way to pray. So let that go and simply pray the words that come naturally to you. Simple, ordinary, uncomplicated, naturally to you. Whenever I think about this, I think about a wonderful thing that happened at Founders Church of Religious Science in the school they used to have there. One day, Dr. Bill Hornaday was visiting to see what was going on in the school, and the teacher, teachers always love to impress so-called bigwigs when they come by. So the teacher said, well, Reverend Hornaday is here, Dr. Hornaday is here, and we have Bobby is ill today. So Jerry, would you please give us a spiritual mind treatment for Bobby's healing? He said, there's one God, one perfect God in the whole universe, and that God is the God that we love. We go to that God now, and we know that Bobby is completely free and clear of illness. And so it is. And she said, thank you very much. Now, Alice, would you say a prayer? She said, why? He already did. Isn't that the truth of it? When you pray with your heart, you don't need 1,000 people saying different words. You pray because you're there. Use affirmative, positive words, and only affirmative, positive words. Now, I know I just said there are no right or wrong ways to pray, and that is totally true, but there are more and less effective ways to pray. And we believe in our New Thought circles that the affirmative prayer is the most powerful and effective way to pray. The affirmative prayer is not a prayer or petition or of begging God to be something for us, but a prayer of accepting God's highest good that is already available to us. So we use words of positive acceptance, starting what we want, not what we don't want. Let me say that again because it is so important. We use words of positive acceptance, stating what we want, not what we don't want. In his book, Be Careful What You Pray For, you might just get it, Dr. Larry Dossey talks about the difference between positive and negative prayer and the quantifiable results scientists have found while studying the efficacy of prayer. Both positive and negative, although there are far fewer studies about negative prayer than positive. Now, for those concerned about the impact studies on negative prayer could have had on the participants, let me clarify. Experiments that harm humans aren't allowed. So the little research that has been done on negative prayer has used human tissue, but not humans. In one study, people prayed negative prayers over cervical cancer cells, wishing them harm. The cells died. Now, you might say the experiment was the same as praying healing from cancer. it's like a double negative, praying harm to something that's harmful. It cancels out the negative to become a positive prayer. But wait, there's more. But wait, there's more. So stick with me here. Another approach to this concept suggested that prayer can inhibit or encourage growth of bacteria and fungi. In France, for example, researchers had 10 people try to mentally slow or stop growth of a harmful fungus. The growth was retarded significantly in 151 of 194 cases. Those are some pretty darn significant results, aren't they? In another experiment, 60 volunteers were asked to influence 9 test tubes of E. coli bacteria. The goal was to make 3 lactose positive, 3 lactose negative, and have 3 remain as they were. Each tube did as the prayer asked. Now, you might be thinking that doesn't prove anything about negative power prayer. That just proves that prayer can change negative things. And isn't that what we're trying to tell us to do? So let's frame those experiments in another way. In his book, Dossie says, we live in a global community. People harboring hate are going to pollute the whole environment. The number of people who mutter about other people is immense. A common phrase used in religious science and New Thought circles is thoughts are things. So when we say or think about someone or a group of people in a negative way, even if we think we're not actively, consciously praying, we're affirming a negative. That thought is engaging divine law. That thought is becoming a thing. Dossie goes on to say that the power of negative prayer may lie in creating a climate of hate, and that in turn can do harm. Evil can take hold of communities. The good news, from his viewpoint, is that even one strong voice for good can unleash good things into the community. Look at the effects of one lady not going to the back of the bus. So, what if we not only changed our thoughts, but we consciously prayed for unity, for harmony, for peace, for good in a situation or circumstance? If one strong voice can change a community for the better, imagine what all of our collective voices can do. That's a pretty powerful realization, isn't it? Let's move on to the next number on our top 10 list. Pray with belief and faith. Oh boy, the words and thoughts we use in our prayers are important. I just said that, didn't I? But what is even more important is the faith, the belief that is beyond the words. I want to illustrate this with a little story. A man was flying in an airplane right after America's first commercial jet air service began with the flight of the Boeing 707. This man was a traveler on a piston-engine, propeller-driven DC-6 aircraft. He struck up a conversation with a fellow passenger, a passenger who just happened to be a Boeing engineer. The traveler asked the engineer about the new jet aircraft. The engineer was most enthusiastic about this new development in aviation. He began speaking at length about the extensive testing Boeing had done on the jet engine before bringing it into commercial service. He recounted Boeing's experience with engines from the B-17 to the B-52. When his traveling companions asked him if he himself had yet flown the new 707 jet airliner, the engineer replied, "I think I'll wait until it's been in service a while." All of that enthusiasm for the process of creating flew right out the window when he came down to his own confidence. his belief in the actual creation. That had to make the other guy really confident about the flight they were taking aboard that creation. Yeah? It's one thing to talk the talk, but do we have faith and belief beyond the words? In Mark chapter 11, verses 23 and 24, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and if you do not doubt in your heart but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you." So I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believing that you have received it, will make it yours. So bring as much faith and belief to your prayers as you possibly can. And as you grow and experience with the power of prayer, your faith and belief will grow as well. You have to do this to understand it. You have to practice it and practice it and practice it. Many, many years ago, when I was about 17, we lived in Las Vegas. And in our building, there was another couple who lived. My stepdad was an accountant and went to work every day into the accountancy. My mom stayed home and tried to make things run and then got herself another job. But the boy in this family was just about my age. The father was a jockey. Not many horses riding in Vegas at that time of year. The mother was a dancer. She was leaving soon. The boy and I hit up a wonderful friendship, and for him it was a very good thing because he got somebody to do something with that was fun, not just an adult in the jockey camp or whatever. And he loved the joy we had, and I did too. And his family did too. Finally, the time came when his mom was going to be leaving to go to New York City to do another show. Dad was leaving to go to San Francisco to train more people in jockeying. That left him pretty much alone. So he moved in with us for a few weeks, and we talked a lot, and we carried on as boys will. And then he said something to me I've never forgotten. It was very simple. He was leaving, and he said, "Don't forget the fun we had." How often do you forget the fun that you have when somebody's out of sight? I have a friend who I rail with constantly about my own miseries, and that friend is always saying, think of what you had. Think about the joy that's there, not just what you're missing now. So much of that happens with us. Offer prayers of gratitude. Gratitude, and only gratitude, on a regular basis. There's a Yiddish saying I love. If we thanked God for the good things, there wouldn't be time to weep over the bad. I love that. Gotthold Lessing, a German writer in the 18th century, said, "A single grateful thought toward heaven is the most perfect prayer." Got that? A single grateful thought toward heaven is the most perfect prayer. And Ernest Holmes tells us, in everything give thanks. An attitude of gratitude is most salutary and bespeaks the realization that we are now in heaven. There's a story of a great religious leader who heard of a holy man who prayed prayers of gratitude constantly. The man lived on an island far away, but the religious leader decided to visit him. When he arrived, he found a poor, simple fisherman. And true to what the religious leader had heard, the man was constantly saying prayers of gratitude. The leader, knowing of the more correct way to pray, decided to teach the man, who listened patiently and then repeated the words the leader had taught him. Finally, The man humbly thanked the leader, and the leader boarded his boat to return home. The religious leader was just thinking to himself what a fine service he had done this ignorant fellow, when he turned toward the island with a look of astonishment. There, walking on the water, he saw the fisherman approaching the boat. When he got within hearing distance, the man shouted to the religious leader, "Excuse me, sir, it seems I have forgotten some of the words. Could you instruct me again?" The religious leader was dumbfounded, but found his voice to call back, No, forget what I taught you. Just go on praying as you are used to doing. Pray as you go about the business of the day. Pray. I've told people very often, there used to be a couple of members of this church who were really dynamic in praying. They had their own prayer ministry in the church. And it was wonderful to see them handle little everyday matters. If you were with them and you sneezed, what do you suppose they said? No, it didn't say bless you. They said, God is blessing you. Always, God is blessing you. And I thought, what a wonderful example of what we can do when we want to. God is blessing you. Pray as you go about the business of the day. Biblical scripture tells us to pray without ceasing. And this is good counsel indeed. In order to have successful prayer life, you have to have a rhythm, a regularity. If I were doing this whole lesson about air and trying to tell you how good air is, and you were to take in just one breath, only one, it wouldn't do much good, because very soon you would be depleted again. The thing that makes air successful is the regularity of breathing. And the thing that makes prayer successful is a regularity of going to God. A regular talking to God and a regular listening to God. You become continually refreshed. When we get into the rhythm of the regularity of prayer and bathe ourselves in it mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, then something happens. A quiet, powerful change occurs inside of us. New spiritual energy comes through us. We feel better, as if a transformation has taken place, because it has. Often you will say to yourself, well, I just don't have the time to pray. Oh, I've heard that one. I wish I did, but I have to do this and that. If I only had the time, the luxury to sit down and enjoy God, I would, but I don't, so I can't. Just as our opening poem reflected. But you have the time to take 1 minute. Prayer is the language of spirit. It bypasses time and space. 1 minute with God is tremendously healing. You can take 1 minute breaks many times during your day, and you will be surprised at how refreshed you feel and what these 1 minute prayers do for you in your life. You will be surprised how near you feel to God's presence, God's peace, and God's power. But you have to do it. Thinking about it and saying, well, maybe I should do this at 3:30. No, do it. I was thinking just the other day when someone had a plea for prayer, how often we let chances go. Prayer might do us good too. We had someone come to the church here, I think it was Thursday, and the church was locked. We had nothing going on at the time. So I saw him at the door, and I walked out, and I said, would you like to go inside? And in a voice a bit choked and tearfully eyed, he said, yes, could I? I said, sure. I unlocked the door, let him in, and I said, would you like to have me stay with you, or would you like to be alone? He said, I'd like to just be alone for a while. I said, okay. Is everything okay? He said, oh, I'll tell you. So I left him alone. He stayed here for a while. I came back once and kind of took a peek at him. And then I thought, it's about time for me to go and talk to him. So I stood up in the office and I saw, as I came around the corner, he was standing up in here. And we met at the back door. And this is the Christmas season, mind you. And I said, are you feeling better? He said, well, that helped a little, thank you. I said, do you have a problem with someone? He said, yeah. I think my wife is leaving me because she thinks that I had an affair, and I didn't. And he stood there, and as I held him, he sobbed. And I thought, how often could we have said a prayer for him other than, well, something's wrong with this guy, let's get him out of here. All they do is stand there and hold him. I think that probably one day in the future you will see him come in here because he was very thankful that someone took the time just to be with him. And I told people after that, you don't have to have all the fancy words, all the beautiful prayers. You have to have the love in your heart to reach out to someone else and let God be between you. And no matter how big your faith is in the mighty God, it has to work through you. You can do it. You just have to do it. Practice the attitude of putting everything in God's hands, like I just said, surrender. Yes, of course, we offer our affirmative prayers with faith and belief, as we already talked about. But then we need to let them go. Turn them over to God. As Unity Minister Jack Boland used to say, my part is to believe. God's part is to provide all that is needed. Piece of cake, huh? Wonderful lady I had the opportunity many years ago to know, named Ventura Papke, was a powerful spiritual leader and religious science practitioner who also served as Ernest Holmes' practitioner. And Ventura always told her clients that after she prayed for them about whatever their issue was, they should wash their hands every time they wanted to take the issue back through worry, doubt, uncertainty, trying to make it happen, or any other emotion or activity, thereby physically reminding themselves that they have washed their hands of it and given it to God. So you could say that after you've prayed for good, if you start worrying about the things you prayed about, you've canceled that prayer. You're telling God to stop the good by returning your focus to the negative you were trying to change. Number 3 in our wonderful list, pray for the people you do not like. Now there's a good challenge. Resentment, hurt, unforgiveness are the number one blockades to personal spiritual power. In Mark chapter 11, verse 25, Jesus said, whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. I once heard Michael Beckwith answer a question with what I found to be a surprising answer, but one that made perfect sense after I thought about it for a moment. The question was, how do you stay in alignment with your vision? His answer was, I pray for my enemies. Wow. That is high and holy work. And a beautiful, simple, outrageously powerful prayer for our enemies is the Ho'oponopono prayer. You've heard me say that 1,000 times. We talk about it regularly here. We're going to do a class on it in the future. The prayer is simply this: I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. Simple as that. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. It's life transforming. Try applying that to the people who perceive as enemies or as a negative presence in our lives. If you practice it regularly, it can change everything. 2, pray for a closer relationship with God. The spiritual healer and teacher Joel Goldsmith wrote about prayer, and anything you can read by Joel Goldsmith is wonderful. You begin to see that God cannot give and God cannot withhold. You can shut yourself off from the grace of God, but through prayer you can be reunited with your source. Your prayer will not be a seeking for anything. It will be a knocking and an opening for more light, greater spiritual wisdom, and greater discernment. Peggy Bassett was an influential religious science minister. She started the Huntington Beach Church of Religious Science and the founder of Ernest Holmes School of Ministry, and she contracted Lou Gehrig's disease and passed away many years ago. About her illness, she once said, "We tend to think that the purpose of prayer is to terminate sickness, but we forget that the purpose of sickness may be to initiate prayer or to deepen our relationship with the divine. If illness is in the service of our own growth, then what really is healing?" I believe the second greatest purpose of prayer, we still have one more, is to bring our conscious awareness into the presence of God. It is to help us look at life from an elevated viewpoint, to see our life as God would see it. Khalil Gibran and the prophet said, "What is prayer but the expansion of yourself into the living ether?" I want to close with what I believe is the number one way for us to have a rich and robust personal prayer life, and it is this: open yourself to be used by God. That happened to me last Thursday. Say in prayer, "God, use me." Not, "God, this is what you can do for me," which is okay and often necessary, but rather a deeper place of, "God, how can I be used by you?" I believe this is the highest form of prayer. And there is no more powerful prayer of "use me" than the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. As we close out 2021 and step into the new year, let us make this our prayer. So close your eyes, please, and join me as I say, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying to self that we are born to eternal life. And so it is. Thank you.